Hello everyone, welcome to round 2 of my coverage of the University Chess Championship 2025, of which I was playing board 2 for the University of Birmingham against some of the best young chess players in the entirety of the UK. I'm going to be covering my game and all of my teammates' games, which will be a little bit shorter than the coverage of my game, but they're all really interesting, and make sure you stick around to the end of my game because the second game I'm going to be covering is our board 1 game against the 8th highest rated player in Japan. Big game. My game was very interesting though, because my opponent, these ratings aren't accurate. I'm more like a 2000 rated player. My opponent's more like a 2100 rated player. We went into the Vienna Gambit, and as you guys know, if you've been around the channel, and by the way, if you haven't watched the first round coverage, check that out first. I give a lot more background to the tournament in that, and also it's just an incredible game. We have a Vienna Gambit, and watch the time for my opponent, because this is a 15-minute plus 10-second increment format, and he's playing his moves instantly. Now I'm playing my moves instantly as well, because I know this theory, and my opponent goes into the f5 lines. f5 only gets played like 16% of the time, but it's probably the most difficult line for white to face. And I know the theory, take, and d4. d4 is very important because everything else, white is just clearly better. Like, let's say bishop to e6. You can see the evaluation is massively in white's favour because white goes d4, white gets the bishop to d3, probably the knight to e2, castles, the knight's coming to f4. It's incredibly nice for white. So black has to play the move d4 here. And the point is that taking is bad because the queen takes, and white is worse. White is considerably worse. So, queen g3 is made to defend the pawn, put pressure on g7, prepare potential tactics with bishop to e2, bishop to h5, where g6 can be met with take, and also to clear the f3 square. So knight to c6, just defending the pawn, bishop to e2, knight to f3 looks very natural here, but as you can see by the evaluation, this is not good. Black just takes, and white doesn't have a clear plan of development. However, after bishop to e2, by the way, I do cover this line in my full Vienna course, which is on my channel if you're interested. Bishop to e2 doesn't allow this because of bishop to h5, and again, if g6 takes, the king has to move, and white is clearly better because the king will eventually get forced to e7, where the queen will be lost. So, black has to know what he's doing, and my opponent knows what he's doing. He's playing incredibly quickly. Bishop e2, bishop e6. Now, bishop e6 stops this, because if I insist, then after take, bishop to f7, I mean, what is white doing? We get 3 pawns for the bishop, but my king is incredibly weak, and I'm probably just going to get mated or lose a bunch of material. So, c4 is played because now black is threatening to take, so c4 protects the pawn. A very, very common move here, and a move that confirmed to me that my opponent had specifically prepared against me. Bishop e4 is the most common move. It's played 62% of the time, and white has to respond with king to d1, and white's king is okay in the centre. It looks a lot scarier than it actually is. But white can try and claim this bishop is misplaced, and if black castles kingside to defend the g7 pawn, white has some decent play. Actually, after bishop to f3, white wins 68% of the time, which is nuts. I don't see how, but okay. That's quite interesting. But my opponent plays queen d7, considered the top engine move, and this made me think, okay, yeah, my opponent has prepared very well against me, and this is going to be a tough game. I go bishop to f3, queenside castle. I go knight to e2, h6. h6 I thought was a really strong move, and the computer really likes the move h6. The point is that he's trying to discourage me from castling kingside, because after h6, if I go kingside, you can see the evaluation drop immediately in black's favour after g5, and at the very least, the pawns are going to roll down the board in some way, and it's going to be very difficult for me to try and defend myself. It looks like take, and queen to f3. This position has only been seen once before, and this is the way that the 2400 player went about the position. trying to trade the queens, which is quite similar to what I actually went for, except in a better variation, because I start with h4. I can't allow the move g5. If g5, take, I can pick up the rook, of course. So, I mean, there is bishop b4 check, to be fair, opening up the rook's attack of the rook, but then c3, and white is clearly better, because after take, check, king, no, d2 apparently is better than f2. Oh, yeah, because king f2 would allow f4 trapping the queen. A very tricky position nonetheless. My opponent goes bishop c5, though, which, again, is the top engine move. The engine also likes g6, but g6 isn't very human. Bishop c5. And he's playing these moves instantly. You can see I'm having to spend a little bit of time. My opponent is spending none. Here I go rook b1. h5 is slightly better, but I was concerned. What was I concerned about? I was concerned about knight to b4. I wanted the rook on b1 to apply pressure to b7 to discourage the move knight to b4. In this position, the computer wants to castle kingside, which does make sense, because, you know, g5 really can't be played, because I'll just take en passant and I'm fine. After knight c2, rook b1, b6. The computer thinks this is equal, but this looks very difficult to play, in all honesty. So I choose rook b1. Black here can go g5, and that's probably the move that I was expecting, but he chooses b6, gets a little bit spooked about the b7 square, which I can't blame him for. Here, I can also go h5 again, but again, I think I was concerned about knight to b4, because there's just two pawns hanging, and the computer wants rook b2 here, which I honestly didn't even consider, because it looks like a very strange move. But there's no bishop to a3, of course, because the knight is in the way, and I'll probably kick the knight out, and my position looks pretty comfortable, to be honest. But I take on c6, and after queen c6, queen f3. My thought process was, and look at my time, by the way, like, I spent so long in this position trying to figure out what to do. And my thought process was, okay, my opponent is deep in prep. He knows this. He knows this down to the T, and I don't. So I need to be pragmatic here. I think that if I can get the queens off the board, I can outplay him. Take, g5. I'd calculated this. Taking is horrific. Gh5, if you trade the rooks and try and play like king to f2, I mean, you're getting slaughtered. These bishops are going to come alive very quickly, and my pieces are completely discoordinated. So, okay, the engine actually gives away my move, but I was really happy with this move, and I was showing our board one after the game, Luke, this position, and he agreed that f4 was a very nice move. What's the point of f4? Well, if takes here, I of course take, and my opponent's got the bishop pair, so I'm keeping things a bit closed. My bishop kind of sucks because of the f4 pawn being in the way, but I can always go to b2 if I want to target this weak pawn, or maybe reroute via like this way in the future. But the point is I keep everything nice and solid. A move like rook here, I can just go king f2 and shut down any counterplay, get my bishop out, get my rook out in the future. So I thought this was a really nice plan. If f4 and my opponent takes on f4, then I can take with the bishop or the knight. I think I was going to take with the bishop and bring the knight to maybe g3. And again, I keep everything shut. I've still got a passed pawn on e5, which black does need to watch out for. And I'm just preparing king f2, rook g1, and I'm pretty solid. If black advances, then maybe not immediately, but I'm going to play knight to g3, blocking up the king side, and applying pressure to f5. And this is a very equal position. It's not clear how either side will make progress. But like I said, my opponent is deep in his preparation, so I'm trying to extinguish his ideas. So I was really happy with this move f4. And my opponent is principled, and he keeps the tension with bishop to e7. Like I said, taking isn't great, and pushing isn't great. So he does none of them. He leaves the tension. I don't want to take him for reasons I explained earlier. I'm not developed quickly enough to be allowing rook trades, because my pieces are completely discoordinated. I go h5, a move I was again happy with. Again, if takes, I can take with the knight or the bishop. Probably the bishop, to be honest. I think they're both fine, but I'd probably take with the bishop, so the knight maintains pressure on d4. I'm going to go king f2 and a move like rook to g1 and be pretty happy. So my opponent goes rook h to g8. potentially threatening to take on f4. I go king f2. I'm relatively low on time now, but my opponent's catching up with me because I've taken him out of his preparation, which was part of the reason for the queen trade. Bishop to c5. This move confused me a little bit. I assumed he wanted to defend this pawn so that this rook could move. I took on g5, hg5, and my thought process was that I go h6. I thought this was really smart because I was thinking this pawn is actually a bit of a problem for black, because let's say black plays a nothing move. I go h7. The rook has to block. I'll take on g5. The bishop's coming to f6, and I will dislodge this rook. I thought, okay, black could play g5 to try and save the pawn, but I still play this, and I still play this, and you don't go bishop e7 in time to save the rook. There is one move here for the black pieces which I actually missed in low time, and he found it very quickly, the move f4, and I was like, ooh, that's a nice move. Why f4? f4 saves this pawn, but doesn't give me access to g5. It also shuts my knight's ability to maneuver, and my bishop's ability to maneuver. So if I were to go h7 now, just rook h8, and this pawn is probably going to fall after rook to d7. So, I played bishop d2. The computer deems this a mistake. It prefers bishop to b2. The point is, I want to develop my bishop to get my other rook to the g1 square so that I can play h7 and then take on g5. Right? Simple. However, I thought the bishop on d2 was better than on b2 because I wanted to maintain control of this diagonal, and I thought that there was no point attacking this pawn because it was well defended. I was wrong. I was low on time again. I did spend a while on that move. And my opponent found the best move to punish it. Try and find the move here with the black pieces. Nice little puzzle. Bishop c4. And my opponent played this move, and I was like, yeah, okay, that was quite nice. But I actually wasn't too concerned, because I was like, okay, I've realized very quickly I can't take. Right? That's very obvious, because I'm going to be completely losing, because everything opens up against my king. So I just ignored it. I only spent, as you can see, about 10 seconds. Rook b to g1. And I was like, okay, you can take this pawn, but I actually don't care, because I'm now threatening h7. If you do a nothing move, h7, rook h8, rook g5, I'm winning this, because knight f4, knight g6, and I will dislodge your rook. My king, you can claim, is a bit open, but I always have the g-file, and my rook is protecting me on the g-file. Probably g3, because g2 would be vulnerable to the bishop. And, of course, a rook can never come to g8 to try and put pressure, because my pawn controls that square. And you cannot win this pawn. You can't play a move like this, because not only does your bishop hang, but I also have ideas of rook to g8 in many lines. So, what should my opponent have done? The only move is bishop d5, attacking my rook. It basically saves the bishop and also forces me to move my rook. So after a move like rook to h2, my opponent can go rook d7. So that if h7, rook to h8, the pawn is hanging and I can't defend it properly, so I can't dislodge the rook from the g5 square very efficiently. And these bishops are just quite nice pieces. That's also not entirely obvious. My opponent takes on a2. And maybe my opponent was thinking, rook a1, bishop to d5, white doesn't have time to take on a7 because the rook hangs. I don't care about the a7 pawn. Try and find the move for white. There's one move. It should be very obvious. h7. The rook has to go to h8. I take on g5. And you can't defend this pawn. So my opponent goes bishop to d5, but now he's too late. I go rook to h2. Literally just defending. Like, not defending, but saving my rook. And how do you plan to stop this? Also, there is another pawn that is about to run through. Sorry about that, my girlfriend was calling me. So, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, okay, so basically, this move comes too late, because there's no way for black to save the f4 pawn. And if I take on f4 with the knight, then the knight is going to be way too strong. My opponent plays a5, which is very reasonable, because if I waste time here, this pawn is going to move very, very quickly, and my rook can't come to h1 to defend the a1 square, although my rook can come to g1 to defend the a1 square. So I wasn't very concerned. I took on f4. My opponent has also wasted a lot of time at this point, and notice the alignment of the rook and the bishop, and the knight and the bishop. That's a bit scary. My opponent goes rook to, well, rook d to f8, pinning my knight. Just calm and collected. King g3. Like I said earlier, the king is always safe on the g file because a rook can never be coming to the g8 square. And my knight is now free to come to the g6 square. So my opponent sacks his rook out of pure desperation, because if knight to g6, the game is over. Now, I was expecting bishop to f7, in which case this is still fine, and maybe I can bring my bishop like this, but I thought this was a bit more resilient. I also was probably going to play e6, if I remember correctly, and bishop to e8, maintaining defense of the g6 square. The computer wants knight d5, targeting this, probably getting the bishop involved as well. So, I mean, I don't really understand what the immediate threat is. Maybe it's e7. Oh, it might be e7 and rook g8. That might be the point. Also bishop f4, though. cd5, bishop e5. Okay, yeah. So, basically, we just clear the diagonal for the bishop. But I thought this was a bit more resilient for black. My opponent must have thought otherwise. I took with the bishop. He goes for a4, which is his only chance, really. I play e6. Why do I play e6? Well, 1, the bishop is hit. 2, I'm threatening to push the pawn. And 3, I'm also disconnecting the bishop's control of g8. If I go rook g8, the game is over. So bishop takes, and I play a move I was very happy with. Rook takes c5. The computer thinks it's not the most accurate, but the point is it wins the game on the spot because of bishop to e5. The rook is hit. There is nothing black can do. The rook has to move. I promote. My opponent spent the rest of his time here trying to find a defense, but there's no defense because you also can't give a check. So the rook moves. I promote. Takes. I'm not really sure why my opponent played on here. There is obviously nothing. And here my opponent resigned and actually kind of stormed off, which felt a bit unnecessary. I mean, I understand it's frustrating to lose, but it wasn't that sportsmanlike. However, a very, very interesting game. I was very happy with how I handled it, particularly considering how well prepped my opponent was. I mean, he only stopped moving instantly on move 16. Before that, he's moving basically instantly. So I was very happy with that result. Now, our board 1. Whoa, our board 1. Luke. He's playing against the 8th best player in Japan. He's rated like 2200 or so, which is, again, these ratings aren't accurate. I think maybe 2250, which is nuts. And Luke plays a Caro Kann. And if you know my channel, you know that I consider this to be essentially a positionally dominant position for the black pieces and kind of a trap. I've got loads of videos on my channel in this position, and it's so good for the black pieces. And, of course, that's why Luke is playing it. He develops his pieces normally. This is how I play the position, because this is how you play the position. And already black has an advantage. Knight c3. I think the correct way to play the position is to bring the knight to d2. Maybe? Or knight c3, bishop e7, h3. And maybe get the bishops off the board. Well, the bishop off the board as quickly as possible. But, I mean, black scores incredibly well in these positions. Anyway, they're both blitzing out the opening. Rook d1, rook c8, and knight to e1, forcing a bishop trade. A bit of a strange way to go about the position. I mean, taking with the knight, I don't really understand either. But maybe he wants to go to f4, which I think he actually does do later. Black could have played a bit more accurately with bishop b4 here. And if the queen moves, the idea is to take, and go knight b4, forking the rooks. A bit of a tough idea to spot. And if knight c3, knight a5, and there's no b3 to stop knight c4 because the knight would hang. Very interesting idea the computer finds. But Luke goes for queen b6, which is very thematic. Knight f3, knight to a5, trying to get to c4, so b3 stopping it, and he just drops the knight back, claiming that this is a weakness, which it weakens the dark squares. It definitely is. But white is a very good player. So white makes it difficult. Bishop g5. Bishop b5. No. Why did the computer do that? I don't know. Knight to f4 even is what white played. So yeah, the point was to transfer the knight to f4. And in this line, a lot of the time, these pawns can sometimes be vulnerable to tactics. Queen a5. Luke goes for a queen trade. Maybe not necessary, but you can't blame him playing against such a strong player. And also, again, this is a team format event. So I think by this point in the game, I think our board 4 had a better position already, and our board 3 was looking pretty comfortable. So Luke was probably happy with a draw and believed that us on board 2, 3, and 4 could bring a result if he gets a draw, basically. But his opponent declines the queen trade, being a very high-rated player, of course. Knight takes, f takes, knight b4. Luke comes forwards. Rook d2, rook c7, rook f1, rook c8. Doubling up on the c-file, and white goes knight to e1, rook c1, and queen to g5. This is starting to look a little bit scary, with this rook coming to f2, this knight maybe coming to h5, the rook's coming to like f7. It's a tricky looking position. Queen d8, bringing the queen back. Rook f2. Knight to c7. A blunder. The move was queen to e8. Why? Well, after knight c7, the idea being if knight takes here, then Luke can go for a bunch of trades, and this is probably either drawn or black is better because of how weak these pawns are. Like, let's say rook c2, rook c2, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what white does here. Like, knight here, g6, knight f6, bishop f6, ef6. The computer wants h6. Or just rook a2 is fine, because the queen always comes to f8, and black is clearly better. But here, find the move for white that wins. The 2250 rated player missed this, so it's not particularly obvious, but it's knight to e6. Of course, you have to take this. But the problem is that queen e6 doesn't work, because king to h8. And where is the attack? If knight c2, then the pieces just get traded, and black is up a bishop. Well, the idea is rook f7, threatening mate, and if bishop to f8 defending, then queen e6, and then if the king goes to h8, there's queen c8. Queen takes, and this is mate. A ridiculously difficult line to find, and you cannot blame white for missing that. But Luke is let off the hook. Almost. Knight h5, threatening to mate on g7. g6, trying to defend. Rook f7. The pawn can't take the knight because it's pinned to the king. Rook takes e1. Rook takes e1. Blunder. The move is queen e6. And if rook f1, not rook f1, we've discovered check, because after king to h8, rook to f7, there is rook c6. Which Luke actually showed me after the game is the line that he found, and he was like, he's fine in this position. But the idea is, after rook takes, king takes. And now, there is no king here, because of rook e7, and there's no time for rook to c6, because rook e8 check. And the g7 square is covered, and the game is over. Crazy. White misses it. He takes on e1. Now, arguably, he could have spent a little bit more time here. I can't blame him for missing the idea. But he also spent about, I don't know, 10 seconds or less. Bearing in mind as a 10-second increment. So, not the best time usage. But king f7. Rook f1. King g8. Luke is up a bishop. Queen takes e6. King takes... Sorry, not king takes. King h8. Rook f7. But like we said before, there is time now, because the rook isn't yet on e7, so there is time for rook c6. Queen e7, rook e7. The knight hangs at the end of the line, and white can take on b7, but knight takes e3. It is 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns, but black has an extra knight. However, these are some scary looking pawns, and it's not clear how to defend. Rook a7. 3 pawns versus 6. Rook c2, best move from Luke. And he had seen that after e6, which looks very scary, rook g2, king h1, rook e2, h4. This is, of course, mate. If you push the pawn, this is mate, because the knight covers g2. So h4, giving the king some breathing room. I actually thought that king g1 looked a bit more natural in this position, but rook g2, king h1, rook e2, it's just perpetual. And Luke, of course, will take a draw here, because he knows that if he can draw, we can probably win on the other boards. Especially at this point in the game, where he can probably see that I'm winning, and I think we're probably getting good positions on the other boards at this point. So h4, white has to fight for a win. Find the best move here for the black pieces. Knight f5. Targeting, defending, attacking. Rook to d7. Targeting the d5 pawn. Knight takes. Pawn to e7. There is one move here for black. Try and find the move. Luke finds it pretty much instantly. Knight to f3. He sets up mate. If rook to d1, king g7, promotion to a queen, rook h2 is mate. If you promote, then you just take it, of course. I did actually think, what if white promotes to a knight? It doesn't matter, the king just moves. He gets away from all the checks eventually, and there is no way for white to stop the mate. Nuts. So, white is forced to promote and give away the pawn. King g2, knight h4, king moves to f2, rook to a8. Luke goes after the pawn. Rook takes, king to g6, king to g3, knight g6, rook h5, rook to g7. Luke has to be very careful here, because if both the pawns come off the board, it's probably a draw. Rook to b5, king g7. And I'm not going to explain all of the moves here, because it's very complicated. But, as Table Base points out, it is a win for black. But let's watch him convert this position as a very, very good chess player. Strands the king over on this side of the board, cuts the king off, starts pushing the pawn, uses the knight to block the rook's attacks on the king, starts pushing, and plays rook to h7, and his opponent resigns, because the rook has to move. Well, let's say the rook goes here. The pawn pushes, and the rook is not in time. He will promote. He can even sack his knight for the pawn. It doesn't matter, because the king in rook endgame is obviously winning. 2-0 up against Nottingham. Board 3. Rob. If you remember Rob from the first episode of this series, check it out if you haven't already, he plays the Alekhine's defense. e5, knight here. And we get the same, not actually the same line, because in the previous game, white took here. I don't understand the theory, but this is what is played. A very similar looking position. I'm just going to... Whoa. I'm going to scroll through a few of the moves, because the moves themselves aren't important in the opening particularly. I'm not going to pretend like I understand them. c5, the knight drops back. And this is kind of a position where black is waiting to break out. Knight f8, queen b3, knight to e6, targeting the bishop, targeting the pawn. Bishop back to e3, a bit of a passive bishop. Bishop to g5, rook d1, c6, bc6, bc6, rook b1, knight f5, targeting the bishop, targeting the pawn. This is a very weak pawn. This is not a stable bishop. Queen to a4, queen to c7, guarding the c6 pawn. Rook b6, targeting the c6 pawn, but this is a mistake because of bishop to f3. Rob doesn't play that. Why is bishop f3 so good? If bishop f3, there is knight ed4, attacking the bishop, defending the pawn. If bishop takes, knight takes, the bishop's under attack, the pawn is defended. The computer wants knight here, which, I mean, obviously just loses the game. But that's when the computer is getting desperate. Rob, he only has 5 minutes left, but his opponent has 40 seconds. Knight e3, fe3, and he goes knight to d8. Now, the move here for white is not king to f2, but white has no time on the clock. The move is knight takes d5. If pawn takes, it's mate in 1, because the knight disconnects the rook's defense of the other rook. White misses it. King f2. Queen e7. The knight is defending c6. Now the queen can turn its attention towards the white king. Knight back to b1, and white resigns. Or no, he actually loses on time, I think. Yeah, I think he lost on time. I think I actually saw him lose on time. He just tried to play any kind of move to, you know, keep time on the clock. But the game is basically over. Rook d3 defends the pawn, but bishop to f5, the rook is going to hang because if the rook moves, black takes on e3 and wins the game. 3-0 up. We've won the game. We've won the game, but our board 4, of course, doesn't know that. Because, you know, that's not how time works. And he goes into a Ruy Lopez. And by the way, I'm showing you all four games, because all 4 games are very interesting. In the first video, I only showed you 2 games, because 2 of them were interesting. Bishop e7. And Togrul has a clear advantage from the opening. He has spent a good bit of time. His opponent's moved very quickly, but white is already better. Because the knights hop in to the light squares in the centre. The bishop it doesn't sacrifice itself, but the bishop takes on d5 because I assume the pressure is really mounting, and this is very uncomfortable for the black pieces. If black, I don't know, tries to go knight here, oh yeah, then you just get absolutely murdered. Something like knight g7, bishop h6. I mean, this is game over. So, and basically black just can't develop this knight because of how weak this bishop is, because this knight is hitting it. The computer wants g6. But even then, like take, knight g3, this is clearly positionally better for white because this bishop is going to be so powerful with no counterpart. Bishop d5, queen d5, hitting the rook. The pawn on a6 is hit. f7 is under a threat. Knight e7, knight e7. The queen can't take because the rook hangs. If the bishop takes, that's a mistake because the queen c6. The queen can't block because the rook hangs, so the king has to go to f8. Rook a6. Togrul goes up a pawn. Rook b8 defending. Bishop to e3. Bishop to f6. c3. Togrul plays very calmly in this position, very solidly. He is down on time, but he knows he has a better position. And at the end of the day, black cannot develop his rook. So if Togrul can just maintain a good position, he's going to be a rook up. b4. He ignores it. Rook f to a1. Take. King here. This pawn is defended by the queen. The rook can't take here because of rook to a8. If the rook goes back, then take, and rook to a8. The queen is pinned to the king. There is no time for mate. So, I've gone a few moves in the future there. King e7 is played. I assume the point is to try and put the rook on e8 and the king back on f8 and try and defend that position. But Togrul doesn't allow it to be that easy. Rook a7. If rook to e8 here, then there's, I mean, he can just take. But there's also bishop b6, which is an idea that Togrul uses to exploit c7 further. Because after black goes rook c8, bishop b6, it can't be taken because of the pin. Queen d7 offering a queen trade. Of course, he declines the queen trade. King to d8, trying to defend c7. Rook b7. Queen to e6. Bishop c7. You can't take because of take and mate. So king back to d8. They're both down to a minute each on the clock, but this is plenty of time to convert. Queen to b4, targeting d6. Bishop e7 defending. Rook a to a7. And this is just, I mean, what can black do? f6 is played, trying to give the king the f7 square and play rook to e8, I would assume. Queen b5 check. The king moves. If the king goes to f7, there is queen h5 check. And if g6, queen d5, apparently. But that's interesting. But I think also just bishop d6 is the easier win. Here. Queen b7. The king is forced up the board, otherwise the rook hangs. And this is probably quite easy to win. Rook c3, of course you can't take because of back rank mate, but you just move the pawn. And white is up way too many pawns. But queen d5 from Togrul, offering a queen trade. Queen d5, queen d5. And the point is that they're both low on time, so Togrul wants to simplify the position, but this cannot be defended with black. He just cannot defend. The king can never go to the 7th rank to let the rook into the game, because bishop d6 will be played, and the bishop will be pinned to the king, so it won't be able to take back. This rook can not really move anywhere. I mean, it can go here. Oh no, it actually can't, because then there's mate. So black's pieces cannot move. His opponent tries to make progress on the king's side by moving some pawns, moves the king over. I mean, there's nothing here, really. The bishop goes to b6, because now the rook cannot take, although that is what his opponent played, because rook e7 comes with check. There's no time for back rank. King moves. The rook goes back to c7. This rook, if it avoids the trade, here, 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 and, I mean, the game is over. Rook c4. Take here, and rook to c7. The rook is forced to trade. Rook c7, the king moves, and there is simply a check on the back rank. If the rook tries to move to save itself, I mean, the game is still completely over. The bishop moves, the pawn will promote, and there is no way for black to escape the... Well, there's no way for the king to escape the control of white's pieces, essentially. So, in this position, the rook is, of course, hanging, and black resigns. 4-0. We win 4-0. A result we were not expecting, but a result we were so happy to get. With a draw in the first round against a really strong team, and a win in the second round against not the strongest team, but still a good team, and a 4-0 sweep. We were very confident going into round 3. And as the bottom seed, can we pull off an upset? If you haven't seen the first episode, check out the playlist that is going to appear down here. If you're watching this in the future, then I may have all 9 videos out by now, so you can watch from round 1 to round 9. And if you want to see my full Vienna Gambit course, which I took great inspiration from for the game today, then check out the video that will appear up here to learn more. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.